Hello and welcome to the third and final session of this series in how to start an investment journey. This will be a 3-part session looking at application in a fair trade context. Over the last few sessions, we have covered knowing and understanding yourself with regard to your money values, your money personality, as well as your emotions and how you respond to money emotionally. We've also had a look at knowing why you are investing and why you're wanting to achieve the specific financial goals that you are aiming to achieve. We've also had a look at establishing your when are you going to actually start saving towards these goals, and even calculating how much monies you can afford to put towards these goals, changing budgets and analyzing your personal cash flows, aiding you to start investing each month. So what will be up next is having a look at what products are the best to actually select to match with your specific investment goals, which you created inside session 2, as well as looking at the appropriate investment solution or fund for you to actually invest within that specific product. We will also be unpacking why we are the first in South Africa to blend traditional asset classes together with alternative asset classes. It's a very exciting session where our dream or plan actually gets put into action. And all of this is aimed or geared towards helping our clients make street smart financial decisions that their future selves will thank them for. Now, before we actually get into this session, I think it's important for us to have a look at why. What is the heart behind these sessions, and why have these sessions been designed or created for our direct clients? Well, the answer is investing direct is great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to try your hand at investing yourself without the help of a financial advisor. Although financial advisors do add substantial value to portfolio construction, we do see this increasing trend of clients wanting to go direct to asset managers. Now, although that is very great, it can also come with some challenges, and that's why these courses have been designed. Investing direct is very much like handing over the keys to a really nice vehicle. You want to be able to know that the person receiving those keys in fact knows how to drive. They know where the gearbox is, what the gearbox is used for. They're not going to get confused between which pedal is brake, which pedal is accelerate. And so much like this, investing, you need to know what you are doing. A lot of investors we see have the best intention to start investing because they know that it is good, it is wise, and it is useful to start investing. However, do these people necessarily have the know-how, the basic understanding of investments in order for their investing to actually be successful? For this topic of educating direct clients to make wise financial decisions in their investments, all was birthed from a specific story that took place in the industry. And this story was related to an elderly lady that had just retired. Now, she had retired from her pension fund with her company, and she approached a very reputable asset manager, and she now wanted to invest her retirement savings and start to draw an income from that investment so that she could survive each month. And so, not really knowing much about investing, she didn't want to go with a financial advisor. She decided to go direct. And so, investing directly, she didn't really know how to choose the right fund, but she went onto the website, she pulled portfolio sheets or MDDs, and she started looking at the funds. Now, she didn't really know what she was looking at, but she picked the fund that had the greatest return, which seemed like the reasonable thing to do at the time because you want to pick the fund that has the greatest return. Now, little did she know this is actually an equity fund. And so, investing her entire retirement savings inside of this equity fund, she began to withdraw a monthly income. Now, we know, as going through sessions 1 and 2, and will continue in this session, that an equity fund does not match the correct requirements if you are going to be withdrawing income each month from that investment. And so about 2 to 3 years pass, and her investment started to deplete drastically until such time she phoned the asset manager to ask why her investment is not performing the same way that the fund fact sheet said it might. It was at that point that she was educated on the fact that she's invested in an equity fund, and by drawing monthly income, she has affected the value or the return of her portfolio quite badly. This is a very unfortunate event with no one to blame, not the elderly lady nor the asset manager. However, we do see this need coming out here, the know-how that investors need to know what they are doing, where they are placing their money, because their mistakes may be quite costly in doing so. Salma, would you please take us through the introduction of the different products that are available to our clients?
When it comes to products that we use every day, they are really designed for a specific reason. If I look around me now, I can see my water bottle, I can see my cell phone, I can see the laptop screen, and each of these products has been designed with a very specific reason in mind. For instance, if I look at my cell phone, it has a keyboard, it has a speaker, everything is geared towards communicating with it. If I look at my water bottle, it is actually an empty container into which I can put some liquid so that I can refresh myself if I am thirsty. It is no different when it comes to investment products. As you can see, different types of investment products are really there to cater for different investment goals. So up here on the screen, we have some of the most common investment products that you will find. Please note, these are not all the investment products out there. We have just put up those that we commonly use in the industry, and especially where you find yourself starting out on your investment journey. You will see we have drawn a timeline here, and we have indicated more or less that this will be retirement, or what we like to call going into your second life. And as you can see, investment products like unit trust, a tax-free investment, other bespoke products, that can be things like structured notes, for instance. They can be sinking funds, they can be endowments. So you can use all of these investment products right throughout your lifetime. However, if we look specifically at retirement products or planning for retirement, you will see there's quite a difference. We will have a couple of products helping you to save for retirement, like a retirement annuity, pension or provident funds, and also preservation funds. And once you move to retirement, then of course you would need a different kind of product to actually pay out an income to maintain your lifestyle. We have a living annuity up here on the screen. Of course, there are also other products available, like for instance a life annuity. For you starting out on your investment journey, a unit trust, a tax-free investment, and also a retirement annuity is what we will be focusing on during this session. Sticking to the tree theme, you will see we have chosen 3 trees to represent different investment products. Keeping in mind the different types of trees are also there to cater for different objectives. Remember, we have looked in the first session at some of those objectives, and we have seen that there would be specific trees that we will use for fruit, shelter, shade, or even timber. So in the same way, investment products will cater for different objectives. We have chosen a fruit tree, a cedar tree, and a pine tree to represent a unit trust, a tax-free investment, and a retirement annuity. We trust that this will just make it a little bit easier to remember if we look at some of the unique features of these trees and compare it to the features of the specific investment product. The first one we will look at will be a unit trust, or in other words, we will look at a fruit tree. So here you will see we have a nice fruit. It is already, I think that's apples if I'm not mistaken. So let's look at the features of this tree. First and foremost, you will see it is very easy or simple to grow fruit trees, or at least that is what they say. If you have the right conditions, you can also grow these trees from seed. And in the same way, it is very easy to open a unit trust. Secondly, you'll see that fruit trees are not very expensive, at least not compared to some of the other trees that you will find out there in the world. And in the same way, unit trusts tend to have lower fees than most of the other investment products out there. You will also see that if you plant a fruit tree, it is really for a specific purpose, as you would want to harvest a specific fruit. For instance, if you'd like to harvest apples, you will plant an apple tree. If you want peaches or mangoes, of course you would opt for a peach tree or a mango tree. In the same way, when it comes to unit trust, it will really be for a specific purpose, or usually it is to cater then for those different investment goals that we have looked at in the second session. For instance, I would like to buy a car in 3 years from now, or a house in 5 years from now. I would like to advance my studies and do an MBA degree in 6 years from now, or even save for retirement in 40 years from now. And yes, you can use unit trust to also supplement retirement, as we have seen a couple of slides back. When it comes to pruning your fruit tree, they say that is very easy, and you should prune your fruit tree just to make sure that it is strong and healthy, and of course it will also produce a better harvest. And a unit trust is very, very flexible. There are really no investment restrictions, no contribution limits, so we can invest across all asset classes, jurisdictions, and you can contribute as much or as little as you would like to a unit trust. Of course, there are different time horizons attached to producing fruits when it comes to specific trees. For instance, a citrus tree can even give you a harvest the year after you've planted it, of course then not from seeds, whereas an apple and a peach tree will give you a harvest about 3 to 5 years after you planted them. Of course, it does depend on the specific type, but then a mango tree can even take like between 5 and 8 years. So that points to the different time horizons that we have when it comes to those specific investment objectives that we have. Once again, you will remember we have divided the investment objectives into short, medium, and long-term goals. Fruit trees are easy to harvest. You can basically just pick the fruit from the tree. It is as easy as that. And in the same way, a unit trust is very easy to access, and your access is also unrestricted. So there would be no restrictions in terms of how much you can withdraw from your unit trust, and usually the money would be available within a couple of days. The next feature would be very easy to grasp, as of course good care will lead to faster harvest and better produce. Some of these investment concepts you'll remember from our very first session, when we said that recurring contributions and also additional lump sums will boost your investments. Of course, also keeping free of bad debt will count in your favor, as you will have more to contribute towards your investment. Last but not least, and unfortunately, fruit trees are not evergreen. Most of them shake off the leaves every year, and in the same way, when it comes to a unit trust, unfortunately, there are not tax benefits when it comes to the product itself. So whatever your return would be on your unit trust, and also when it comes to capital gains, that will be taxed in the hands of the investor. But of course, you will also have certain exemptions that will count in your favor at the end of the day. But as far as the investment product itself goes, unfortunately, not much of a tax benefit there. That, of course, then sums up our fruit tree, and hopefully you get to see why we compare these two. Here is a quick video on a unit trust.
What is a unit trust? A unit trust is also known as a pooling vehicle. Let's say someone wants to invest. However, the amount they are able to contribute is not that much. Even if they invested this full amount, it would mean placing all of their money into a single security. In terms of balancing risk, this is not a great idea. This is where a unit trust comes in. The individual can contact a fund manager that pools together investors' money and buys a group of securities with specific financial objectives. Now there is a balance of risk across a number of different securities. These securities are combined into a portfolio by the fund manager, and this portfolio is divided into units between all of the investors who bought into it. Each investor receives a number of units according to the amount of money that they invested individually. How well the portfolio performs is determined by the fund manager, managing the assets included inside of the portfolio. Common unit trust investments include equity in shares, bonds and fixed income, cash and cash equivalents, as well as alternative assets like property and hedge funds. By investing in a unit trust, you get the balance needed inside a portfolio, diversity across many securities, as well as a lower initial investment amount required.
Next up would be our tax-free investments, or seeded trees for that matter. Why have we chosen a seeded tree to represent a tax-free investment? A seeded tree is really a majestic aromatic tree that usually grow on rocky landscapes, and here would be some of its other features. First and foremost, they are not hard to grow, at least that is what they say. I don't know, but what I do know is that a tax-free investment is easy to open and to manage. Secondly, when we look at cedar trees, why do we plant them? Very interesting. There's not only one specific purpose that really stands out when it comes to cedar trees. In the same way, there's not necessarily a specific goal you need to have in mind when it comes to a tax-free investment. Cedar trees can be used for different things. You can see up there on the screen windbreaks to combat soil erosion. They provide wildlife habitat, and you can also use them for furniture and building products. In the same way, whether it's wealth creation, long-term planning, or adding to your retirement, a tax-free investment will actually speak to all of those. So it's not necessarily only one goal that you need to have in mind when you open a tax-free investment. A cedar tree will take about 20 to 30 years to reach its full size. Of course, it depends on the type of cedar tree that you look at. Some of them do grow a bit faster, but this is very, very important to grasp as an investor if you're interested in a tax-free investment. It is a tax-efficient vehicle, yes, but it needs to be a long-term discretionary goal that you have in mind, with an emphasis on long-term. When we're going to look at some of the restrictions when it comes to tax-free investments, you'll get a better idea of what I mean by why it's so important that it should be long-term. But it's really not about just paying money into your tax-free investments, withdrawing it again, paying in some more money and withdrawing some of it again. The money you pump into a tax-free investment, ideally you should leave it there for 20, 30 years or even longer if you can. All of their returns would be tax-free and it would be reinvested, so you can just imagine the kind of compounding that you will find within the specific product. Next up, very interesting to note that a cedar tree doesn't regrow or resprout after a fire. They are highly susceptible to fire due to their combustible oil. So when they actually burn, even if not to the ground, all that will remain would be this sort of prophetic skeleton that will just be there on the rocky landscape. So there's not really regrowth that takes place. And that's important when it comes to a tax-free, because an investor should understand that the annual and lifetime contribution limits are capped. We're going to look at that in more detail just now. And very importantly, withdrawals cannot be replenished. So after you have, I can put it like this, burned away or withdrawn some of your money in your tax-free investment, you actually cannot replenish it. So there won't be any regrowth on your tax-free, but we're going to look at that in more detail now. Be careful when pruning your cedar tree, as it actually has green leaves on the outer portion of its branches, and they say these green leaves really need to be protected at all costs, because if you cut off too many, your tree can actually die. So there's a couple of restrictions and limits when it comes to your tax-free investment, and we're going to look at those limitations now, but just be aware that they are there. But fortunately, there are no investment restrictions. So there would be no prescription in terms of what we can invest into and which jurisdiction. So we are free to invest as aggressively as we want to within a tax-free investment. Once again, good care will lead to faster growth when it comes to your tree, and obviously you will have a stronger cedar tree. In the same way, if you can, depending of course on your financial position, you should really try and utilize your maximum allowable contributions, and I'm going to tell you now what they are. But over the years, because if you do contribute where the current maximum limits are set at, it's going to take you about 14 years to reach your limit, and I mean that's a very long time, and even leaving it for a longer time still, it will absolutely provide phenomenal results at the end of the day. So ideally you want to see how fast you can get there, but please remember that if we look at a tax-free investment, it should be taken into account as a whole, or looking holistically at your investment portfolio. Last but not least, cedar trees are evergreen, and this of course speaks to the amazing tax benefits when it comes to this product. As the name would say, tax-free, it is completely free from tax when it comes to any interest, dividends, or capital gains or losses within this product. So how does the contributions then work? And I've mentioned this a couple of times. An investor really needs to be mindful of the following. As it currently stands, there would be a contribution limit of 36,000 Rand per year, and then 500,000 Rand over an individual's lifetime. If you exceed these limits, there will be a 40% tax penalty payable. That would mean if you, for instance, contribute 40,000 Rand per year to your tax-free investment or investments, because they look at them in combination, then you will be taxed on the 4,000 Rand that you have exceeded. Once again, over your lifetime, if you contribute more than 500,000, as it currently stands, you will also be taxed at 40% on whatever you exceed that limit by. This is usually great concern when it comes to when we look at how people treat tax-free investments, because they tend to understand these limits incorrectly. So we just quickly want to do a calculation or two to show you the difference. For the sake of this exercise, I'm just going to call this 1 Rand for now. So if you pay 1 Rand into an account and another 1 Rand, of course you will have 2 Rand in your account. If you withdraw 1 Rand, you will have 1 Rand in there. And if you once again contribute 3 Rand, you will have 4 Rand in your account. That makes sense. So your balance will be sitting at 4 Rand. However, this is not how the contribution limitations to a tax-free investment works, because it is based on contribution trackings that look like the following. If I pay 1 Rand into my tax-free account and another 1 Rand, yes, I will have 2 Rand in there. If I withdraw 1 Rand, I will have 1 Rand in there. And if I contribute 3 Rand, yes, I will have 4 Rand in my account, but my contributions would be at 5 Rand because I've contributed 1 Rand, 1 Rand, and 3 Rand. So my contributions would be sitting at 5 Rand. And that is what the difference between balance tracking and contribution tracking would be in my tax-free savings account. So what could happen over time is you could have, I don't know, in a couple of years, let's say for instance 10,000 Rand in your tax-free investment, and you could have used up your 500,000 Rand lifetime contributions. Then at the end of the day, there was really not much use or benefit at all using a tax-free investment. So please be mindful of this and make sure that you treat a tax-free investment as a long-term investment vehicle. That being said, we will now move on to our third and final tree, and that of course will be a pine tree or a retirement annuity in the investment space. Of course, everyone knows pine trees because they are looking forward to Christmas when they see a pine tree, but pine trees are really regal and beautiful trees, usually standing taller than the others. So let's look at some of their features compared to a retirement annuity. Firstly, you will see that they are not complicated to grow. Once again, I won't know, but I do know it's very simple to open and manage a retirement annuity. When we think about pine trees, the term pine wood comes to mind. That is because if you had to look around you, pine wood would be all around because a lot of furniture will actually be made from the wood of pine trees. So retirement annuities are really investment products that we use for a specific reason, and that of course would be to save towards your retirement, to provide you with a sustainable source of income during your retirement or second life, as we would like to call it. So it's saving for retirement, and there's actually no other reason why you would take out a retirement annuity, also as the name would suggest. It takes a long time to grow pine trees because the more mature the tree would be, the more valuable its wood would be. As you would see there, of course, depending on the type, but it takes about 25 to 30 years for a pine tree to mature. In the same way, a retirement annuity should be viewed as a long-term retirement savings vehicle. They say you should be very careful when you prune a pine tree, and you actually shouldn't prune them at all because aggressive pruning can cause irreparable damage to your tree. So there are actually a lot of things when it comes to restrictions and limitations when we look at a retirement annuity. So it's not that easy to prune. The first one would be an investment restriction, and that is because the retirement annuity falls under the regulation of Regulation 28 of the Pension Fund Act, and that basically gives us prudent guidelines in terms of how we can invest whatever is in your retirement annuity. For instance, it will prescribe how much we can expose to equities or how much we can expose to the offshore equity market, whatever the case might be. So there would be certain guidelines that restrict us when it comes to making certain investment choices within your portfolio. When it comes to accessibility, you will see that you can't access the funds in your retirement annuity before the age of 55. Of course, there would be a couple of exceptions to this, but it's really in very, very rare cases. For instance, if you immigrate, if there's disability, or if it's below a certain amount, which is currently 15,000 Rand. But for all intents and purposes, please note that whatever you put into your retirement annuity, you can't touch that money before the age of 55. And even when you do reach the age of 55, you can only take 1/3 of whatever is in your retirement annuity in cash, and the rest, or the other 2/3, must be used to purchase a compulsory annuity, which will provide you with a recurring payout of income thereafter. So it's not only about reaching 55 and you can draw all of your funds. In this way, they actually protect investors, because many people would just withdraw all of their money, they would use it up in a couple of years, and by the age of 60 they won't have anything to sustain themselves with until whatever age they might reach. The next one will, of course, be good care will lead to faster growth and better quality of wood. And also, interestingly enough, when a pine tree sheds its old needles, you can actually just leave them on the ground because they act as a natural fertilizer, because they decompose. So when it comes to your retirement annuity, first and foremost, there would be no contribution limits. So you'll remember when we also spoke about fertilizer in the first session, you can really boost your investment by paying in extra money. And then also, secondly, income and capital growth until you retire is tax-free within the product. So in that way, it will act as its own natural fertilizer, making sure that whatever is within this product, your investment will actually boost to its utmost. Last but not least, pine trees are evergreen, which means they have certain tax benefits, and you will see up there on the screen as it currently stands when it comes to contributing to your retirement funds, right across your retirement funds, whether it's retirement annuities, pension funds, or provident funds. You will see you will have a tax deduction of up to 27.5% of the greater of your remuneration for pay-as-you-earn purposes or your taxable income, and that is of course capped at 350,000 Rand per year. Taking it a step further, if you do exceed that limit, your contributions will be carried over to the next tax year. So this is a great incentive to contribute towards a retirement annuity because you will receive a tax deduction for the contributions. This then sums up your retirement annuity or your pine tree, and once again hopefully you get to see that it's really a tall, long-term investment product with a very specific reason, and that is saving for retirement. When we look at the working of a retirement annuity, you will see here, I've mentioned it when we looked at the previous slide, but just to put it into a bit more perspective, whatever goes into your retirement annuity, as I've spoken about the natural fertilizer, there would be no tax in terms of dividends or capital gains within this product, so it can really grow. I don't want to say at a rapid pace, but I mean at the end of the day you do receive the benefit that it's not taxed in this regard, and of course that would mean a greater compound growth over time, especially over the long term. And because of the tax deductions that you do receive for contributing towards this product, of course your taxable income will also be reduced, saving you some money you would have paid away to SARS. If we had to look at all of the trees, the fruit tree, the pine tree, and the cedar tree, the next step would really be to match them with the financial goals that we have identified in the second session. You will see the goals there up on the screen. You would still remember that financial goal grid that we have set up, and here you will see my goals in that session was I wanted to start an emergency fund, I wanted to buy an apartment, I wanted to start saving for retirement, I wanted to buy a new car, I have added I want to create wealth over time, and then I also wanted to do an MBA degree. So taking it one step further in this session, we will then look at how do we match these trees with this specific goal. So let's take the first goal, start an emergency fund. What should an emergency fund look like? Because that will determine what investment product we will choose. Of course, it needs to be a very flexible fund because we would need access to this actually instantly, because an emergency just like happens and I would need the money. Also, I need to withdraw whatever amount I would need from this fund and not be restricted in any way. And then the unit trust or the fruit tree would actually be the suitable investment product, or the most suitable investment product for this emergency fund due to its features that we have looked at just now. In the same way, when it comes to, for instance, buying an apartment, buying a new car, or doing an MBA degree, there would be certain time horizons attached to them, and once again a fruit tree would most probably be the best investment product to cater for these investment goals or financial goals. When it comes to start saving for retirement, the pine tree or the retirement annuity would definitely be one of the products that we would prefer, just due to the fact that we can get amazing tax benefits and everything that I have mentioned during the last couple of slides. And last but not least, creating wealth. Remember, this is not a specific goal as such that a specific time horizon is attached to it, or I need to, let's say for instance, reach 2 million in a couple of years from now. Creating wealth over time can just be, I'm not saying it's a vague financial goal, but I mean it could go either way in future. So in that regard, you can use a cedar tree or a tax-free investment to add to your creating wealth goal that you have. So this is actually then what you should do when you look at your financial goal grid. You should take your financial goal and you should match it with the most suitable investment product. These investment products, please note, is governed by legislation, rules and regulations, which actually determines how the vehicle functions. So they don't function the same. Remember when we looked at the tax-free investment, there were certain contribution limits. For instance, when we looked at the Pine Tree, there were certain restrictions in terms of when you can access your money and also how much you can withdraw from that investment. So each one of these investment products would actually be governed by certain pieces of legislations and rules. This brings me to the next point when it comes to the product itself. It's very important to note that this product or vehicle is really an empty shell. It is basically just a container, like my water bottle, which I mentioned earlier, and it must be filled up with something. So when people say that their retirement annuity has performed amazingly over the last 10 years, it's really not the product. It is what was inside the product, the funds that were chosen, the investment portfolio that sits within this retirement annuity. So the vehicle itself is really not why the investment is performing well. It is only there to give us the structure within we can actually then move. The question then, of course, would be, if this is only an empty shell or container, what do we need to fill this up with actually to give us the performance at the end of the day? What is the substance of this investment? And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kiara to bring you up to speed with how do we choose the correct filling for our investment products. Thank you, Kiara.
That really is a great question. So having a look at the common ways, or three very common ways in which people like to start their investment journeys, we would have a look at unit trusts. Some people invest in a diversity of unit trusts or blend them together inside a single portfolio called a model portfolio. There's also investors that like to go directly into shares or even purchase different properties. These are all different ways or forms of investing, or ways that one can invest. Now today we are going to be covering different funds or unit trusts or combinations of unit trusts within a specific portfolio. And the reason for that is a concept called diversification, which we will get into a little bit later on in this session. Alright, so the first place to start in choosing the correct fund filling or unit trust or portfolio, fund fact sheet, all of these words can be used interchangeably within the industry. You'll also see MDD, which stands for minimum disclosure document. All of these interchangeable words in essence mean the same thing, which is this document over here. Now it looks quite foreign, maybe overwhelming to some because of all these elements on the document we're not quite familiar with. And so what is this document actually telling us? Well, as its name suggests, a fund fact sheet, it's a sheet that contains facts about a specific investment fund or portfolio. Now looking at this, commonly what takes place is we as people tend to gravitate towards that which we know. And so with all these foreign things on this document, we often see people gravitating towards looking at the return story only in isolation when trying to match a specific investment goal that one has to the correct investment. And as we saw in our previous discussion about the elderly lady and her retirement fund, that doing this is not necessarily the best way to go. So often people will default to what they know on this document, which is having a look at a return story. Now, a return story is great. It's an element that needs to be considered when looking at a specific investment. However, it mustn't be the sole reason why we go into an investment. And the reason for that is there's an entire story that is told on the rest of the sheet, which can actually really help you match your investment goal to the correct investment. So let's have a look at what some of those actually are. So having a look at your investment profile, that tells us something about time and risk of this specific portfolio or fund. So here we can see that the risk profile is a medium to high risk with an investment horizon of 7 years. So just looking at this information under the investment profile, we can clearly see that if our investment goal we're looking to find the right investment for is an emergency fund, this would not be a good investment to choose because the risk profile is medium to high. For an emergency fund, we want something that's stable, that will protect our capital, and so risk profile medium to high, that doesn't really suit an emergency fund. But if we are looking for something to grow in the long term, this is a 7-year investment, and so we could consider this one as an option to match with our specific financial goals. Another place that you can have a look at is the investment objectives. So that will speak a lot to the purpose of the investment. This investment is managed by a portfolio manager, and this portfolio manager has designed a specific strategy that this solution will follow in order to derive market returns. And so you can read about that investment strategy in this little paragraph. Now, there might be a lot of words that are very jargon based here that might seem a bit overwhelming, but a very key or easy way to pull out the purpose of this investment is to look for words that we commonly use. For example, reading through here, we see the Fairtree growth. So this is about growing monies, and they want to outperform the benchmark over a 7-year period. So we can see this is long-term, high risk. The purpose is to grow, and because of risk, we want to be able to diversify across a variety of different assets. And so here we see the element of time and risk and purpose all coming together to help us match to our right goals. And so over here, if we were to be looking for an investment for an emergency fund, this paragraph will contain words like protect or preserve capital. And so they will be able to start seeing the purpose coming through, helping us to select if this is the right investment for us. Taking a look at the fillings. So here we see that inside this actual solution, it's made up of different unit trusts and hedge funds. There's that story about being the first in South Africa to blend our traditional asset classes, which is found in our long only space, together with our hedge funds. All of this we will learn more about later on in the session. But ideally what this is telling us is there's a diversity of different assets. So here we can see regional broken up into your local and your global across a variety of different assets, being property, equity, cash, some directional strategies through your derivative structures taking place, as well as fixed income and some soft commodities. So here we see a story again unfolding about this specific investment. Another very important element of this document is this step-like structure that we see here, and this is called correlation, which is the relationship between the underlyings or the holdings within the fund. Again, a concept which we will go into in greater detail later on. So we see here that there are many elements inside this document that, when we understand them better, start to tell us a story about whether this investment is a good fit for our goal or not. Something that we'd like to dive into before we go into the session is some myth busting. So here we have a statement: frequent switching in and out of investments or unit trusts make more return. Now, there are many debates about whether switching in and out of things actively does in fact outperform, or if buy and hold is greater. We are not going to go into the debate of which one outperforms in this session, perhaps in a session later to come, but just to give a bit of a definition on what these two concepts actually are. Active investing is a very hands-on approach, usually done with the expertise of a portfolio manager. The objective here is to beat the stock market's average return. So you'll want to take advantage of all short-term price fluctuations taking place on the market. There's a lot of deeper analysis that's done here with a lot of expertise backing it, and often a portfolio manager is accompanied with a team of analysts, and they look at some qualitative and quantitative factors when deciding what investments should or should not be included within the portfolio. Because of all of these different elements of active investing, this is quite an expensive activity to partake in. Not only because of the team and the analytics required, but also trading costs, which get triggered every single time you churn the portfolio. Having a look at your buy and hold investing, this is less hands-on, often less stressful, and investors here will buy and hold a specific unit trust or hedge fund. So here we see two different layers taking place. We see that of portfolio managers within the portfolio who are actively managing the portfolio on that level, deciding on which securities should be held inside the portfolio. And then you get our level, which is the unit trust or hedge fund level, where we are not deciding the underlyings or the holdings inside that investment, but we're rather deciding on which investment, unit trust or hedge fund, we are going to just buy and hold. Often here we are in it for the long haul. This means that we need to resist the temptation to react to different market news or change portfolios with haste. Because we are not churning the portfolio as actively, the cost is much less. I think something that is very important to note when going into detail of these two different kinds of investors is there are experts and then there are experts. And so taking a look at our session 1, where we discuss the importance of increasing our financial literacy, we need to have a look at who we are actually listening to or taking advice or guidance from within the market. And so here's our concept of experts and then self-proclaimed experts. So on the one hand, you'll have your experts deemed by the industry. They have a qualification. Sometimes they don't necessarily have a full university degree qualification, but they have a level of theoretical knowledge or understanding that's not only just theoretical, but it's been practically applied, and they have time-tested success and time-tested experience. They don't necessarily just get it right one time, but it's actually a proven track record. These portfolio managers tend to have the assistance of an analyst team, which obviously checks their biases, checking different perspectives or views and evaluations. These people tend to have more than one screen. They have 3 to 4, sometimes even 6 screens in front of them, all with different kinds of analytics running on the screens to have a look at what's happening not only in the market, but also within each company. So there's a variety of different quantitative and qualitative factors that they are taking into consideration when assessing what should be included inside a portfolio or not. Then on the other hand, we have these kinds of experts. Maybe they do have a qualification. It might be a legitimate qualification, but they don't have any time-tested experience, or maybe they just did a short course online. Perhaps they are trend investors, so they'll say, oh look, the market's going up or the stock is going up, we need to buy in now. But there's no quantitative or qualitative analytics behind that decision. It's just simply buying and selling based on trend. Also, you could have read an article sometime on a stock's value, or something may rally and sometime, or it might crash, and so that's the reason why you get in or out of specific investments. Or we are listening to our loved ones around us who might also be self-proclaimed experts. Now, although all of this might be fine or good and have an element of success, we need to be aware of tracing different trends. This is herd mentality. So different people will go into and out of investments and follow other people going into and out of different investments based on trend, purely looking at if the market or stock is going up or down. When it comes to reading of different articles, although it's very good and important for us to invest in our financial literacy, we need to ask ourselves questions like, how often do I read, or how often does this expert read, and who writes what is being read? Do they have an exemplary track record which has been time-tested wealth creation, or do they tend to just get it right when there's big market dips or bubbles? And another important element of reading articles or listening to any online material or videos is, have you examined counter thought? Why this is so important is because of something called confirmation bias. Now, what confirmation bias is that we as humans tend to look for information that validates our existing belief. And so we tend to ignore anything that is contrasting to what we want to actually see. And so if you believe a stock is going to go up, when you go online, or when these experts go online, they would tend to look for information that confirms their belief. So it's important to actually subjectively read information and look for counter thought. And so there's this concept here that we need to be aware of when deciding if we're going to switch portfolios and try and chase returns, or if we are going to be patient and trust the strategy of the portfolio manager managing the underlyings within that portfolio. So again, that is looking from a direct investor point of view. So chasing returns can be likened to a concept which is quite common in all of our lives, and that is traffic. We all want to get to our destination in the shortest amount of time possible, and there's nothing worse than waiting in traffic on a highway. But the concept here of chasing returns on the stock market is very similar to that of jumping lanes in traffic. And so if you could imagine for a moment that we are all stuck in traffic, we're going to the same place, and all of us want to get there on time. Now, we could either just sit in traffic, trust our lane and allow it to go, or we can choose to jump lanes. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I've been in an incident where there has been a person who is jumping lanes around me, and they keep passing me, and then I pass them, and then I pass them again, and then they pass me, and then you awkwardly pull up to the traffic light at the turnoff next to one another, and that person looks a whole lot more stressed because they've been jumping lanes trying to get there instead of just staying in the lane. Now, why does that take place? And this is based on theory which has got to do with trends. Now, when it comes to the market, it is said that there is no way of actually being able to accurately predict a trend. And the reason for that is because even if a trend did exist, that trend, once discovered, would self-destruct. And so what do we mean by that when comparing it to a traffic situation? When we're all on the highway heading towards our destination, even if one lane was moving faster than another, the minute a person or a group of people identify that that lane is moving faster, and so to change into that lane, that trend is no longer true because there's more traffic now inside that lane. And so these trends will appear throughout the market, but the minute people react or respond to them, the trend that once existed now disappears. And so chasing returns on the stock market is much like that. Often by the time we have reacted or responded as a direct investor to the move or fluctuation or rally or crash, it is often already gone. And the reason for that is because of the experts deemed professionally by the industry. Their analysis was true both quantitatively and qualitatively, and they acted immediately and often in large amounts of money. And so these trends that once were identified so self-destruct. This being said, there are incidents and cases where there is legitimate reason for somebody to exit a stock because a company maybe acted fraudulently or is about to go under with quantifiable and qualitative reasoning. But simply just looking at the market up or down and making decisions based on up or down is not the wisest option to choose. And so we see why here that it is extremely imperative that when choosing an investment, we do not look at returns in isolation, but we have a number of other elements to help us choose the correct investment for us. And after the break, we are going to assess in part 2 what are some of the other things that we can consider when selecting the investment that is best for us. you.